Hello and welcome back to Retfurb. So on this video we've got this Selle Italia Turbo seat that we're going to be replacing the covering on it. So obviously the first thing we need to do is start peeling off the old covering. So I'm not sure what it is that's on here. I presume it's some sort of suede, but I'm not sure if it's real or not. It seems a bit sort of, I don't know, manky. I don't think it's going to be too hard to get it off. So the first thing we need to do is just peel it off around the edges. And then once we've got all the edges sort of peeled, then we can look at peeling off the top. So this is removing it from the original foam. Now you want to be careful when you're doing this. Obviously you don't want to be pulling off big chunks of foam because it'll be harder to prep up for the new piece of leather that goes on there. But as long as you don't take it off too sort of roughly, you should be able to sort of remove it without removing too much of the foam. So just carefully peeling it. If you feel a little bit of resistance, just sort of go slow around the area and just take your time. Now some parts you might find it difficult not to peel the foam off with it. Luckily with this one you can see that it's coming off quite well. There's a little bit of the covering that's been left on the foam, which I'd rather that because I can sand that off. But when you get round to the front on this, you can see that here it's sort of stuck down pretty well. So it's starting to rip quite a bit of foam off. So I'm just going to go around with a blade and just trim it as I'm going. Obviously going careful because I don't want to be cutting into the foam too much because it'll be harder to sand it out afterwards. But if you sort of just cut around the edges and if it removes a little bit, it won't be too bad. So that's the covering all removed now. And now we can look at sanding down the surface and just getting it nice and smooth, ready for the new piece of leather. So I've just got a belt sander here with I think it's 120 grade belt on it, which is perfect for doing this. So again, just going around carefully, just smoothing all the foam out, just taking your time with it really. Obviously with this one, I was quite lucky because it didn't sort of pull off too much of the foam, so it was fairly easy to go around it. And that's it, that's all prepped up. Now we can look at getting some adhesive onto the leather. So just a few coats of it on the leather first. You will have to apply more as you're going along. And now as you can see, I'm just putting some adhesive on the actual seat itself. But like I say, as you're going along, you can add a little bit. Just be careful you don't go too mad with it, but you can add little bits. So with this piece of leather that I've got, it's a real piece of leather, so it manipulates quite well. Now you can see what you need to do is sort of stretch it. You don't want to go too mad and stretch it and rip it, but you need to sort of stretch it as you're forming it around, which will make it easier to go underneath and it will produce less wrinkles as you're doing it. Now if you don't do it this way and you just try and put it on flat, you'll find it harder to lap around the edges. As you can see, I've sort of pulled it quite taut around, and it's got the top surface nice and flat. As you can see, I'm just applying a bit more adhesive around the edges just to give it a better adhesion around there as I'm going. So it's all about just taking your time with this. You don't want to go too mad. You just need to be pulling the leather around and just as you're doing it, making sure that you're pulling out any sort of wrinkles and creases as you go. Now I did notice after I got to this point, you can just see on the front edge, the front nose of the seat, there's a slight imperfection in the leather, which I didn't notice. If I'd noticed it as I was putting it on, I could have positioned the leather a bit further forward and probably that would have been hidden. But there you go, I've done it now. It looks worse in the video than what it does in real life, to be fair. So now I'm just going around trimming up the leather, just removing any sort of excess. I'm not going to go too mad, but just go around and trim off a bit so it makes it easier to form it round. And now just applying a little bit more glue around the edges again. So now onto the front nose part, I'm going to get that done first. That's probably the worst part of the whole seat to form on any seat you do. Now this seat, it wasn't too bad to be fair. This one formed quite nicely, probably because it's quite big, the nose on it, so it made it a lot easier to fold it round. Now I'm not saying it's easy, but it's just easier than some of the other seats I've done. So now that nose part's all tucked in, we can look at working our way around to the back and tuck the rest of the parts in. on this Selle Italia Turbo seat, the rails were actually quite easily to sort of push out the way as you're doing it. Some seats are quite rigid, but this one had a little bit of give in it, so you could tuck them in a little bit better. So now again, just applying a bit more adhesive around the back, and now starting to pull it round and trying to get all those wrinkles out the back and making sure that it sits all nice and flush. So this seat was probably one of my favourite seats that I've done so far. I just found it really easy to manipulate the leather around it. Whether it was the shape, I don't know, but I just found it a lot easier to form round. It might be that the leather I'm using is just a bit more formable than some of the other stuff that I've used. Particularly the last seat I did with the vinyl, which was a nightmare. But yeah, this seat, you know, with this, I just found it really nice to do, and I actually quite enjoyed it, and I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing another one actually, and maybe in a different colour at some point. So as you can see at the moment, I'm just forming it around the shapes at the back. You can see that it's going really well. The leather's sort of smoothing out all around the edges really well, and once it's trimmed, it should look really good. So that's the bulk of the forming done now. That little bit I'm just rubbing over there with just a little bit of adhesive, which just comes off easy. I've just got a little bit of solvent based panel white, which is quite mild, which will just get any of that off. Obviously you want to be a bit careful what you use on the outer surface so it doesn't mark it, but I've used it loads of times before and it is very mild. So now I'm just using the end of a screwdriver, which again I've said before in other videos that you shouldn't do. I just grabbed it because it's on the side. Obviously using something like this you can easily damage the leather, so it's better to use something soft, or well, not soft, but something rigid, but it's not got so much of a point on it. Now I'm just going around trimming off the excess leather at the back, just removing sort of the bulk of the bits that I don't need back there and just tidying it up. Stupidly, I decided to use a blade which is about 5mm long, which just made it a hell of a lot more awkward to go around and cut it than what it usually does if you use a longer blade. But you can see just after trimming it how good that looks now. It looks so much more tidier. And now I'm just using a screwdriver just to put a bit of pressure on the front nose and make sure that adhesive in that area is just gripped properly. And now on to fitting the heat press vinyl. So I've got 5 lots of turbo decals that have got to go on this seat. So there's 2 at the back, 2 on the sides, and there's 1 on the nose. So as you can see, it's a case of putting the decals on there, putting the heat-proof paper on there, and then just running over it with the iron. Now, when you do this, it's best to just go slowly and take your time. You don't want to overheat it and damage the material you're going on. And as you can see, you know, those 2 just come out well straight away. Now I'm going to fast forward. I've done the 2 side ones at this point, and now I'm just doing the nose. The nose is a little bit trickier due to the shape, but as you can see, the finished product, it's come out really well. Really happy with it. I really like this seat. I've never actually used one, so I don't know what they feel like, but I should imagine they're probably quite comfortable due to the shape of them. So that's another successful refurb completed. So next time I might try another Selle Italia Turbo seat, but in a different colour. Again, I'll only be using genuine leather. I just find it a hell of a lot easier to work with. I find that it forms a hell of a lot better. So I'm really happy with this seat. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. It's really appreciated as always. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.